Now that brings up an issue about the macroeconomic environment here that all of this takes place in. There's a very important chapter, I believe Dr. Barrett mentioned this last year on these panels, in Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, that talks about the rise of the Israeli security tech sector. Of course, there's issues with the shock doctrine in the book. Naomi Klein does a very powerful economic analysis, but her geopolitical analysis is obviously failing. In this chapter on the rise of the Israeli security tech sector, she takes time out to make sure that people know that she doesn't believe any of the conspiracy theories that she's heard from people of color, whether in New Orleans and the levees or in Southeast Asia in terms of tsunamis and weather weaponry, that type of scenario. But she's very clear that it's all about just taking advantage of situations rather than who's actually doing this shocking. Doesn't the shock doctrine, isn't that come out of CIA psychiatry, MK Ultra? Did someone, you just wait, if you're trying to program someone's mind, you just wait for them to just run into, put their finger into an electric socket? No, okay. But meanwhile, this chapter is very important because she points out, and this is very powerful evidence of, at the very least, foreknowledge, Israeli foreknowledge in institutional sectors, that in the run-up to September 11th, the Israeli economy was sort of heading towards a collapse of some sort. They put all of their chips into these security sectors, into counterterrorism, and then in the years since, they've basically become, I'd say, the prime mover and shaker globally are in these sectors. So they're sort of the non-aligned party. They're the non-aligned country in many ways of the World War IV scenario, the global war on terror. They're in the middle, making security moves with everybody. So people should look into that chapter. It's really important. It brings up the issue of is this a long-term plan, a strategic plan coming out of Israeli military intelligence combined with human intelligence, Mossad, relations with Shin Bet in terms of as a domestic operation, FBI operation, to dominate the security sector, to dominate the technology sector globally. And in fact, it does look like that. We begin to see Israeli companies all around the world, especially in the United States, but increasingly all around the world in these key areas, including in infrastructure, critical infrastructure, a lot of the back ends of our computer systems. If you look at September 11th, there's definitely P-Tech and MITRE. Chris Boleyn has done very interesting analysis of what was going on behind the scenes and how that was part of the September 11th operation. A lot of that looks like it hooks right back into Israeli military intelligence. There is something called Talpiot, a program, an operation that was started, I believe, after the Yom Kippur War, where the Israelis suffered heavy losses and decided to make a plan to build up an Israeli military intelligence sector that could basically, so they would never lose again, in a way. And so Talpiot, look that up. There's a activist from Australia, Brendan O'Connell, who's been putting this front and center, who was arrested for offending a Jewish Zionist activist's feelings. We should start talking about this. We should look at this sector. The Technion is basically a combination of the Israeli MIT and Caltech, all feeding military technology. Of course, that's sort of what Caltech and MIT are too. But what this is, the Talpiot folks, it's a very elite group. It's dozens, maybe a year at the most. They get trained not only in mathematics, engineering, but also special forces operations, Green Beret type scenarios. Okay, you have Unit 8200. That's of course the Israeli NSA. They're up to their necks in things like the false flag against Gaddafi in the 80s that got the U.S. to bomb Gaddafi, they planted a Trojan horse in the middle of Libya. They were also apparently involved in the Syria false flag and the Ghouta false flag operation, planting rocks that were actually transmitters. So they basically are on the ground feeding the NSA, the U.S. signals intelligence, the false signals to create a false flag operation. Stuxnet, of course, is the best example of this, what Brendan O'Connell has termed kill switch diplomacy. In the Edward Snowden film, it does show how it doesn't talk about the Israeli perspective on this, but it talks about how everything's tripwired. All the grids around the world are tripwired. So in a certain way, you could consider this an extension of the Samson option. This is what the FST, their biometrics, they also have these kits so you can take into other spaces. So it's not only a fixed operation in your building, in the Jewish installations that have contracted, but you could bring it maybe into a library or to protect. There's maybe, for example, the need to set up a temporary security perimeter around a VIP. So, and here's an example of what it actually looks like. You see people's faces, it identifies them, it hooks up into databases. What databases, we don't know yet, but I'm interested.